Hi and welcome. This is Mohammed Kubaib. Welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, we are going to discuss about Azure Site Recovery for our Azure Virtual Desktops. If you like this video, please hit the bell icon and subscribe to my channel so that you can get the future updates. If you want to learn more about Azure, Citrix or AWS, you can check out my bestseller Udemy course, which is also available in Udemy for Business. So Azure Site Recovery, which is also known as ASR, is a Microsoft's disaster recovery as a service solution built specifically for Azure workloads. So ASR enables companies to recover from catastrophes quickly with minimal downtime. In this video, we are focusing more on Azure Virtual Desktop, that too on personal host pools. So the pooled host pool scenario we already covered in our previous videos. You can find that video in the YouTube channel. So before we jump into Azure Virtual Desktop site recovery in detail, so let's see why we need Azure Site Recovery solution. Consider you're going to deploy a Azure Virtual Desktop personal host pools. So basically, host pool consists of session host, which is nothing but virtual machine and the disk. So when I say personal, so all the data will be stored locally on the particular virtual machine disks. For example, let's say I have a user 1, and I have a user 2. So the user 1 will access this particular virtual machines and user 2 will access this particular virtual machine. So all the data, whatever they're changing or whatever they're storing on the VDI, so it will be locally stored on this particular disk. So in personal VDI pool, so all the data won't get stored in the network share or in the FSlogix profile. So instead of, it will get stored locally on the virtual machine. So now consider a disaster scenario. Either it could be due to natural disaster or man-made disaster. So when I say natural disaster, it may be due to earthquake, flood, etc. And man-made disaster such as hardware failure, cyber attacks, power failure, or network failure. So in all this scenario, your data center or your Azure region may have service interruption. For example, let's say you have a flood. So the entire Azure region may go down. So in this scenario, the user, which I mentioned earlier, user 1 and 2, so they cannot be able to access the virtual machines. So because of this, they cannot able to do their day-to-day BAU activities, which will impact the business, resulting in financial or reputational loss. So in order to minimize the impact of disaster scenario, there comes Azure Site Recovery. So Azure Site Recovery solution, it will replicate your source disk from source region to the target region. So for example, if you have your virtual machines deployed in Chennai, which is in Azure South India region, so it can replicate to either to Central India, which is in Mumbai, or to another region. For example, consider there is a disaster in Chennai. During this disaster, all the services hosted in Azure Chennai region will go down. So in this scenario, we can reduce the impact of outage by bringing the service in another region quickly with the help of Azure Site Recovery. So even though the complete region is down, still user can access their same virtual desktop along with all the data from another region. So this is the beauty of Azure Site Recovery. And this is very important if you are deploying personal host pools. So let's see how ASR works in terms of replicating the data from one region to another region or from one zone to another zone. So in this example, I have two virtual machines. So this one and the associated disks. So now I wanted to do ASR for this virtual machine in order to protect from disaster scenario. So there is a service ASR. So when I enable ASR service, so basically what it will do, first it will install a agent called site recovery agent on this particular virtual machines, and then it will create a cached storage account, and then in the destination it will create disks. So for example, if you wanted to protect two VMs, so it will create two disks. So if you have more than two, then accordingly it will create the number of disks in the destination or in the target infra. So let's say I'm writing some data to my virtual machine. So the agent which is sitting on this virtual machine, which I mentioned, site recovery agent, it will immediately send all those changes to the cached storage. So all your data which will get stored in the cached data as well. So from this storage account, it will replicate to your target storage. Either it may be a storage account or it may be to the disk. So this is how eventually you will have all the data from your source region to the destination region. So here the cached storage account, it will act as a bridge before sending the data to your destination region. So the beauty of this particular ASR service, in the destination, it won't create any VMs unless and until you invoke disaster. So here you're going to pay only for the cached storage account and the disks which you are creating in the destination region, along with ASR charge, which is $25 for each VM. So for example, if you are protecting two VMs, it means $50 per month. So accordingly, the billing will happen. So you're going to pay for the compute or for the virtual machine only during the failover or during the disaster scenario. So in Azure Site Recovery, snapshots and recovery points plays a vital role. So it is very important to understand the snapshots and recovery points in ASR. As we can see, the data flow. For example, I am storing or writing some data, so it will get stored in this virtual machine disk. So eventually, that data will also get copied to the storage account for the replication. So now this data flow or the data which is getting stored in the cached storage, so this is nothing but the snapshots. So the Azure Site Recovery Service will take the snapshot of this disk at regular intervals, and then it will place it in the Azure storage account, and then it will replicate to the destination region. So in the destination region, it will create a recovery points. So based on the interval, for example, Azure Site Recovery taking up snapshot at 10 o'clock. So in the destination region, it will create a recovery point at 10 o'clock, and then the and the next snapshot will be at 10:30. So similarly, in the destination region, it will create a recovery point at 10:30. So similarly the list goes on. So during the disaster scenario, if you wanted to bring your disaster site up and running, you can choose the recovery points. For example, let's say if you wanted to bring the disaster site at around 10 o'clock, so you can choose this recovery points. Or if you wanted to choose some other recovery points, for example, let's say you have a recovery point somewhere around 3 o'clock, so you can choose this point, and then you can bring your virtual machine back to 3 o'clock recovery points. So this is how snapshots and recovery points plays an important role in the Azure Site Recovery. So when it comes to Azure Site Recovery, we have two types of snapshots. One is crash consistency, another one is application consistency. So the crash consistency, it will take a snapshot of the data disk of the virtual machines, and it will happen at every 5 minutes, and it will keep the snapshot up to 72 hours. So the meaning of this is, for example, you have a virtual machine here and a disk which is attached to the virtual machine. So at every 5 minutes, the Azure Site Recovery will take a snapshot of this disk. So this is called crash consistency, and it will keep this for 72 hours. And then we have application consistency snapshots. For example, let's say you have this virtual machines and you have a disk in this virtual machines. So the application consistency snapshots is nothing but it will take the snapshot of this disk along with whatever the content available on the memory as well, RAM. So this is the complete snapshot of the virtual machine data. So it includes both disk as well as memory, whereas the crash consistency, it doesn't have the details about what are the things stored in the RAM. So let's say if you are planning for ASR for your database, then it is better to go with application consistency, because database usually writes a lot of data very frequently, and there are chances there are still many data available in the memory which is not yet written to the disk. So in this case, if you enable application consistency snapshots, you can recover the data which is also available in the ROM or in the RAM. So however, when it comes to crash consistency, So this is, let's say, if you have a virtual machine for other non-sensitive workload, or maybe let's say Azure Virtual Desktop, etc., where it is not writing very frequently to your disk, so then crash consistency is preferred. So if you see the timing, the crash consistency will work at every 5 minutes. However, the application consistency, it will take the snapshot at every 1 hour, and it will keep this for 24 hours. Whereas our crash consistency, it will keep it for 72 hours. So when you are working with Azure Site Recovery or any other disaster recovery scenario, it is very important to understand the recovery objectives. So there are two very important points we need to know, which is a recovery point objective and a recovery time objective. So recovery point objective, which is also called as RPO, is the maximum duration of acceptable data loss, and the recovery time objective, this is the maximum duration of acceptable downtime. In order to understand RPO and RTO, let's take the scenario. So you have your Azure region, which is in South India, Chennai, and then you have a disaster region, which is in Central India, Mumbai. So here you have a virtual machine, and this virtual machine will have a disk. So similarly, in the disaster site, as I told you, you will only have a disk. And then here we have a ASR, so it will replicate all the changes to the destination region. For example, let's say I am the user, I am using this VM or virtual desktop, so I am doing some changes or I am writing some data. For example, let's say at 10 o'clock I am writing some data to my disk here, let's say ABC. So the Azure Site Recovery, what it will do, it will replicate the data to the disaster site based on my settings. For example, if I wanted to replicate at every 10 minutes or 5 minutes or 15 minutes, so I can set accordingly. The minimum is 5 minutes. So let's imagine you set to 15 minutes. So at 10:15, so it will replicate the data to the other region and it will create a recovery point. So similarly, at 11 o'clock, I am writing some more data, which is XYZ along with ABC. So at 11:15, it will replicate the data and it will create the replication point. So this is how Azure Site Recovery will replicate to the destination and it will create a replication point, so that at any point of failure, I will have a recovery point to restore my VMs or my data. So now let's say at 12 o'clock, I am writing some data which is ABC, XYZ, and 123. So before reaching 12:15, so I have a disaster. So let's say my entire Chennai region goes down at around 12:14. Okay, so why I am mentioning 12:14, because if I mention after 12:15, I will already have a replication points, but my disaster happened before the replication point. So now at 12:14, I don't have the complete region. So I wanted to quickly bring my other region up and running so that my user can log in and they can work. So I'm going to kick in Azure Site Recovery failover. So while I'm doing the failover, it will create a virtual machine, but the recovery point which I'm having at my disaster site, which is of 11:15. So now I will get my data which is just ABC XYZ. So I won't get the data which is ABC XYZ 123. Why? Because this particular data is not replicated to my destination. So I'm going to lose this data. So this defines RPO. So which is nothing but maximum duration of acceptable data loss. So in this scenario, so my last replication happened at 11:15. So my disaster happened at 12:14. So the time difference between this approximately 59 minutes. So the RPO, which is recovery point objective, which is 59 minutes in this case. So the meaning of this is I can afford a data loss of 59 minutes if any disaster happens. So that is about RPO. Now let's see what is RTO, which is recovery time objective, which is nothing but a maximum duration of acceptable downtime. The meaning of this is the time required to bring the DR region up and running. So for example, let's say the disaster has happened at 12:14. So now you need to bring the disaster region up and running so that your user can able to log in and work on the application without any issue. So this may take time to bring your DR site up and running. Maybe it depends on various reasons. For example, let's say if you need 1 hour to bring your service up and running, so then it is at 1:14. Let's say if you bring your DR site up and running, then the ITO will be 1 hour. So let's say if takes more than 1 hour, let's say it is taking 2 hours. For example, at 2:14, your DR site is up and running, then the ITO will be 2 hour. So by default, Microsoft is saying when you use ASR, you will have your site up and running within 2 hours. So that is the SLA for Azure Site Recovery. So which is 2 hours. So if it is exceeding 2 hours, then Microsoft will provide you credit for this service. So this is a brief about recovery point objective and a recovery time objective, and this is very important. So you have to agree with your management when you are designing any BCDR solution for your application. So you have to agree with your management as well as business that I can afford this much duration of data loss, and I can afford this much downtime in order to bring the services up and running in another region. So let's see the demo how to configure ASR for our Azure Virtual Desktop personal session host. So where I will have a VM which is deployed in Central US under Zone 1. So zone are nothing but collection of data center within the region. So I'm using Zone 1 to deploy my virtual machines. So I'll have my VM. So I'm going to store some data on this VM, and then I'm going to use Azure Site Recovery, and I'm going to replicate to my secondary location, so which is zone 2. So here I'll have my disk which is having the same data. So later we can use ASR to do the replication, and we can ask the user to connect to zone 2 and to launch the virtual machine from here, and to make sure that all the data which we have saved earlier on zone 1 is available once we do the failover. Similarly, after this activity, we are going to write some more data here and then do the failback, so that all the data which I have stored during the disaster also should replicate back to my primary region. So this is the activity we are going to perform. So let's go to the Azure portal. So I'm at the Azure portal here under Azure Virtual Desktop Session Host Pool Blade. Currently, I'm having one virtual machine. So if you go inside this virtual machine, we can see on which zone this virtual machine is deployed currently. So I'll go to the VM blade. So currently the location is Central US and it is deployed in zone 1. So it means that in Central US, Microsoft is having three zones, which means three data center. So this virtual machine is deployed in zone 1. So if you go to all resources in this particular subscription, we can see we have AVD, BCDR, VM, NIC, disk, and VNet, and then host pool related application group, etc. We don't have any storage account or any recovery service alt or Azure Site Recovery related objects as of now. So now we are going to log into this virtual machine. Then we are going to do some changes to the virtual machine and storing some data. Then we will see how we can configure ASR to replicate the virtual machine to other zone in Central US. So using another browser tab already launched the virtual desktop. So if you see the name of the virtual machine, which is AVD-BCDR-0. So here we are going to save some data. For example, I'm going to create a folder here, and under this folder I'm creating a text file. This is for our failover reference. So I'm going to name it as test1, and I'm going to save some data here, 1234. I'll save this. Similarly, I'll do some changes related to the edge or word, etc. So I'm going to pin this application to the taskbar. So these are the settings these are the settings I have configured in this particular virtual machine. So now we are going to do the ASR for this particular virtual machine, and we'll try to replicate all these changes to the other zone. So we'll go back to Azure portal, and then we'll go back to the virtual machines. So here under virtual machine, we need to search for disaster. So we'll have this option, which is disaster recovery. So it will give you these options like, do you wanted to do the disaster recovery within availability zones or across region? So the difference is, so if you wanted to select yes, it means that you're going to perform the disaster recovery or ASR within availability zones. So if you don't want to do availability zones, instead of you wanted to use a new Azure region as your disaster site, then you need to select no, and here you need to select your required region. Since I'm using zone, so going to select this yes. So the benefit of using availability zones is nothing but we have a option to use same vnet or subnet across all the availability zones in the particular region. So let's click on advanced. So we will review some of the settings related to site recovery here. So the first option is subscription. So if you wanted to change the subscription for your target location or your DR location, you can choose. However, if you wanted to keep the same subscription, you can do that as well. When it comes to VM resource group, so you can create a new resource group or you can select existing resource group itself. So however, it is highly recommended you use a new resource group for your DR location. So it will avoid confusion otherwise. And then when it comes to Azure Virtual Network, so as I told you, I'm going to use the availability zone. So this will give me the biggest advantage to use the same network in my disaster site as well. So coming into the very important option, which is availability zone. So currently my VM is in availability zone 1. So now I can choose whether my VM to be available in my DR site, which can be hosted in zone 2 or zone 3. So I'm going to choose zone 2 here. So the meaning of this is, when I do ASR, my VMs will be available in zone 2. So that is the meaning of this particular option. So that's it when it comes to target settings. Then we have some capacity reservation things. So if you wanted to do a capacity reservation on your destination in terms of VM quota, etc., then you can select the respective capacity reservation group, or else you can leave as it is. Storage setting, so it's again, so it will ask the churn for the VM. So there are two options here, high and normal. So normal is for all the applications which doesn't write the data very frequently. If you choose high churn, it is basically for the SQL kind of workloads where data write frequency will be very high. So in this case, since this workload is Azure Virtual Desktop, so we normally choose normal churn. So then we have storage account details. So as I told you, it will create a storage account. So keep as it is, and then it will ask the source managed disk and the replica managed disk type. So for example, if you have a source virtual disk as HDD, so in the destination you can either choose the same, or you can choose the different disk SKU in the destination. So I'll keep as it is, which is HDD. So then we have replication settings. So these are some of the settings related to the replication. As you can see, vault subscription, recovery service, old resource group, replication policy, etc. So I'll keep default. I'm not going to change anything. If you wanted to customize, you can choose. And then we have some settings related to extension setting. So I'm not going to change anything here. I'll keep as it is. Let's hit on next. So it will review all the configuration. So if everything is fine, then we can click on start replication. So looks like all good. So let's hit on start replication. So as you can see, it is creating the target resources. So it means that now it will spin up the storage account, as well as it will create a managed disk in the zone, which is in zone 2. So let's go to the resource tab, and we'll see. So as of now it did not create any resource, so let's wait for some time. So now it deployed some of the components. As you can see, it is created a recovery vault resource group, as well as it is created storage account, it seems. So let's go to the all resource tab and we'll refresh, and we will see what are the things it's created. So as you can see, it's created a storage account as I told you, and then it created a recovery service old and automation account, etc. So now it started the replication. It means that it is copying data and the VM configuration from central US zone 1 to zone 2. As you can see, it is enabling replication for one VM. So let's wait till it finishes the replication. So now we can see enabling replication for VM1 is also completed. So now let's go to Azure Site Recovery, so which is recovery service old. So let's go inside this. So under Azure Site Recovery Blade, so we need to go to the replicated items. So under replicated items, we can see the details of our virtual machine. So let's go inside this. So as you can see here under status, currently it is showing 0%. The meaning of this is the data, it is just started to replicate or synchronize between zone 1 and zone 2. So we need to wait till it reaches 100%. So once it reaches 100%, it will show as completed. Then we can do our failover test, etc. So let's wait for this. So now synchronization is completed. As you can see, status is protected. Here, some of the things we should aware, such as RPO and latest recovery points. So if I select a latest recovery points, so as you can see, this will provide you latest recovery points. So at around 7:10 p.m., it created a crash consistent recovery point, which is nothing but all the data in the disk. Then we have app consistent, which means all the data in the disk as well as on the memory, which is on the RAM. So it is around 645. As I mentioned earlier, Azure Site Recovery, it will create crash consistent recovery point at every 5 minutes. For example, if it is 7:10, at 7:15 it will create one more recovery point, so that during the time of disaster or failover, you can restore your virtual machines to this particular recovery points. Similarly, it goes with app consistent, so it will by default it will create at every 1 hour. So this is the configuration. So also you can see most recent, so it means as you can see here, at every 5 minutes it is creating a recovery points. So it started from 650, then 55, 7, 75 and 710. So when you are doing any failover, you can select which recovery point you wanted to revert. Accordingly, you can bring the VM in the destination zone as per this recovery point. So this is related to recovery points. Then we have a very important option over here, which is RPO. This is the maximum duration of acceptable data loss. The meaning of this is, for example, at this particular moment, if my zone goes down, then uh, there is chances of losing data which is written in the last 41 seconds. So for example, let's say in the last 41 second I have stored some data, then probably I may miss that data when I do failover to my other zone. So this is the meaning of RT. So now our ASR configuration is completed. Now we can either do failover or test failure. So failure is nothing but the real disaster scenario where one site is completely unavailable. Then you can go and kick the failure option. However, test failure, it is nothing but DR drills or some planned DR activities. What it will do, it will basically create a test virtual machine with the same configuration as like your source virtual machine. So however, in this demo we are going to do the real failover test. So let's click on this option. So now it will validate few things, and then we need to agree on this, and we need to click on continue failover. So again, it will ask source is the central US, which is zone 1, destination, which is still in central US but zone 2. It is nothing but a complete different data center. Then we have failover settings. So this is nothing but to select the recovery points. For example, I wanted to restore my VM, which is in zone 2 to particular timestamp. For example, at 6:45, I can choose this. Otherwise, you can keep the default one, which will have lowest ITO. And then we have one option here, shut down machine before beginning the failover. So since we are doing this planned failover now, so I will shut down the VM in the source region before I proceed the failover. So since we cannot bring the zone 1 down, this is out of our control and it is completely managed by Microsoft. What we can do, we can shut down the VM in zone 1. So it will be as similar as invoking the DR or invoking the disaster. So I will select this option and then I will click on failover. So now what it will do, so it will shut down this particular virtual machine, and then it will create another virtual machine which is of same configuration with the latest recovery point, and it will spin up in zone 2. So now what we are simulating, we are assuming that zone 1 is completely down, and we will bring the VM in zone 2 and then we will try to access it. So if I go back to my notification here, so it is started to do the unplanned failover. So if I go to my VDI session, as you can see, now I got disconnected because the process shut down this particular virtual machine. So let's refresh this and see it is deallocating. So let's wait till it completes this particular task. So now the failover completed. So if we go to the virtual machine, as we can see, it created a virtual machine in zone 2. So the meaning of this is basically it created a virtual machine in another zone with all the data and configuration as similar to our source virtual machine, which is in zone 1. So let's go to Azure Virtual Desktop Blade. So here under Azure Virtual Desktop, if I go to session host, I can see one machine. So let's see the availability. So it is available. If I go inside this machine, so as you can see, currently it is in availability zone 2. So this is the beauty of Azure Site Recovery. So we can get our virtual machines in another region or another zone. It will get automatically updated in the Azure Virtual Desktop host pool as well. So let's go and launch our virtual machine. So I'm going to the browser session. So I will try to so it's connecting to the VDA. Let's see our customization and data is available. So now finally we are in the virtual desktop. So as you can see, I can see my folder. So let's go inside this folder and we will verify whether we have our data stored here available or not. So as you can see, my folder is there, my file is there. Inside my file I have the contents as well, similar to the customization which I performed earlier. For example, Edge, Word and Microsoft PowerPoint I pinned to the taskbar. So everything is as similar. So if I go to my virtual machine uh, CMD, I can verify the host name of this virtual machine, so which is AVD BCDR hyphen 0. So this summarizes how we can use Azure Site Recovery to quickly bring our DR infrastructure online so that we can reduce the business impact. So if you go to our whiteboard, what we have done, we had our virtual machine in zone 1, and then we have our DR location which is zone 2. So we had one virtual machine over here, and then we used ASR to replicate the virtual machine, and then failed out this virtual machine to this particular virtual machine in the DR location, and then we asked the user to connect to this. So user got all the data and all the settings intact. So now the virtual machine is up and running in zone 2. So now the question is, let's say if I do any changes here, for example, I'm going to store some files, folders, etc in this particular virtual machine in zone 2, and let's say after some time my zone 1 is up and running. Let's say the Microsoft has fixed the issue on the zone 1 and now this is healthy. So now you wanted to revert back, so you wanted to run your primary location. So now how we can replicate the data which we have stored in the zone 2? So for this we need to something called reprotect. So reprotect, what it will do, it will replicate the data whatever you stored in zone 2 back to zone 1, so that you can bring your primary location up and running with all the configurations or all the data which user has saved. So let's see how we can do this. So let's go to the portal and we will see how we can do that. So I'm going to the portal. So here we need to go to recovery service alt, and then we need to go to the recovery items. Then we need to go to the replicated items. Then we need to select the resource which we are going to do the replication. So here we have an option called reprotect. So this is the option. It basically will do the replication from DR site to the primary site. So before we going to do this, we will write some data to our virtual machine. For example, I'm going to create a new file over here. So now basically my VM running on the DR site. I'll mention it as DR site data. So now I have written the data. Then I will start the reprotect. So it will validate the details and then we will click on OK. So it will give the option. So it will show here reprotecting the virtual machine. So basically what it will do, it will replicate back to the primary location. So now under status, you can see it is enabling protection. So which means it is basically replicating the data which I have written in the DR site back to the primary location. So if you click this option, it will give you in detail what is happening in the background. So let's see. So see, these are the tasks it is executing. So currently it is installing mobility service agent on the target, and then it will do the replication enablement, and then it will do the replication. So let's wait for some time. So now as you can see, it started the synchronization. So currently it is at 0%. So let's give some more time. So now the synchronization is completed and we can see it is in a protected state. So now we can do the failback. So to do that, we need to click on failover. We need to follow the same procedure as we followed earlier. So let's agree for this. Click on continue and I'll keep the default one. And then I will click on shutdown virtual machine before beginning the failover. So let's click on failover. So while this process is going on, let's go and check the virtual machine status. As of now, as you can see, my virtual machine is still up and running in zone 2. However, in zone 1, it is still off. You can see it is now disconnected. Why? Because it is shutting down the virtual machine in zone 2, which is our DR site. So this process may take some time. So let's wait and come back once this is done. So now failback process completed. So if we go back to our virtual machine, we can see the virtual machine in zone 1 it is up and running. It means that the virtual machine in production zone, which is our primary zone, zone 1, is up and running. However, in the DR site, which is in zone 2, it is showing as stopped because we have mentioned shutdown. However, the beauty of ASR is after some time it will get deleted automatically. The VM will get deleted automatically on the DR site. So this is all about Azure site recovery. So again, if you go back to your host pool and if you see you have one machine available, so let's go inside this machine. So everything is fine here. So if you go back to the site, so if you go to the overview, we can see availability zone 1. It means that our VM is back online in zone 1. So let's log in and launch the VDA and we will see the data which we have stored while the VM up and running in DR site. So I'm going to launch the browser session. So I'm trying to reconnect. So it's launching the VDA. So currently this VM is in primary data center, which is in zone 1. So we have successfully logged into the VDA. So here we can see the data which we have saved during our failover. So that data successfully got replicated when we did the failback as well. So this is how you can configure Azure Site Recovery in order to do planned or unplanned DR exercise or DR activity. So one important thing you have to remember here, once you do the failback, so you have to reprotect the virtual machine. Otherwise, it won't do the replication. So when you click on a reprotect, again, it will do the replication from active site to the passive site. So let's do it and we'll see how to perform this activity. So under reprotect, we just need to click OK. So now it is again reprotecting the virtual machine and it will start the replication from zone 1 to zone 2 or one region to another region. So always remember, after the failback you have to do this manually, otherwise you won't have any protection. So you won't have any data to be replicated to other site. So let's say if you have host pool consist of multiple virtual machines, so and you wanted to protect all the VMs, then you can go to the Azure Site Recovery Vault, and here under replicate, so you can add the virtual machines. So for example, here you need to select your source region, which is Central US, and then you need to mention the subscription and resource group, etc. And then you can click next, and then you can add the virtual machine and follow the same process. As I told you earlier, that after some time it will delete the virtual machine which is present in DR location. So as you can see now, we don't have any VMs running on zone 2, which is our DR region. So this is how it can save cost as well. Like post failover, it will delete the resource in the DR. So this is how we can use Azure Site Recovery in order to protect our virtual machine from natural disaster or man-made disaster.